Good evening, and you're all very welcome to this evening's webinar, which is being brought to you tonight by the Teagasc advisory staff here in County Mayo. My name is Brendan Gary. I work in Teagasc and Ballinrobe, and tonight, for the next hour, I'm delighted to be your host for this webinar on this Tuesday evening. Now, this evening's webinar is the first episode in a new four-part series of webinars, which will run for the next 4 weeks, each Tuesday night at 8 p.m, and the same link will work for each episode. Now, during this new series, we will cover some of the key agricultural issues facing Irish farmers in 2025, and tonight will be no different. Tonight, we will look at two distinctly different topics, but ones which are of interest to farmers. And the first topic tonight will be a presentation by ICBF researcher Chris Daly, who's going to give us an update on the latest ICBF evaluations. And Chris will also provide us with some regional suckler data. While later this evening, Seamus Nolan, scheme sports specialist in Teagasc Castlerea, and Seamus is going to provide us an update there on TAMS 3. Now, you, the viewers this evening, are being encouraged to engage with our speakers here tonight. We ask you to type your questions into the Q&A tab at the bottom of your phone, screens, or tablets. And later this evening, Alan Nolan, dry stock advisor based here in Teagasc and Ballinrobe, will put your questions live to both Seamus and Chris. So please do type your questions into the Q&A box. As always, this webinar is being recorded and will be available to watch back on the coming days on the Teagasc Mayo YouTube channel. So without further delay, I'll now ask you, Chris, to start sharing your presentation with us. And indeed, it's over to you now, Chris.
Is that sharing there, Brendan, yeah?
It looks perfect, Chris. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, ideal. So good evening, everyone. Brendan has already introduced me. Look, just firstly, thanks to Teagasc Mayo for asking me to do this. It's always great to get to present some information to people. And look, my attitude is if everyone takes one or two messages away from these, then it's a success. So, yeah. Look, I'm just starting off with a few interesting stats, I suppose, for anytime I present to an audience. I always try and present stats from their own kind of county or region of the country. So this is a Mayo audience. So what I did was I looked at suckler cow numbers firstly in County Mayo. These go all the way back to 2010 up to 2025. You have the totals. I also broke them down by, suckler bred versus dairy beef. And look, nationally, we've seen a decline, and it's the same in County Mayo. You go back to 2010, 77,500. There was a high of 80,000 in 2013, and it's dropped off to 60,000 in 2025. So in 12 years, you've essentially a quarter of the cows have fallen out of the system. The graphs there, so your green line on top is your total. The blue line is the suckler bred animals, and the orange line here is the first cross dairy suckler cows. So like almost 90% of the suckler cows in Mayo would be beef. They'd be suckler bred, at least 3/4 bred beef animals. Very little influence from the dairy. Nationally, nationally it's about 80% suckler bred, 20% dairy beef bred, and that's been consistent for the past probably 10, 15 years, and it's staying the same. There's no increased influence from either the suckler or the dairy side. You have about 4,300 suckler herds in Mayo with an average herd size of 14 cows. So, it's on the smaller side. The national average is probably up closer to about 20. So the herds in Mayo would be that little bit smaller. So then if we're to look at the calving stats, so again, I took Mayo and I also compared it to the national average. So just 4,209, just under 4,300 herds. 13.6 females calved. Now, you might wonder why was it 14 the last slide. I suppose the thing is that not every cow produces a calf every year, so the number of females calved is a little bit lower. So 13.6 average number of females calved versus 20 in the national average. The age of the cows, the average age of the cows, so 4.3 calvings versus 4.4, so more or less the same. Slightly better on calving interval, 396 versus 400 calves per cow per year is more or less the same. Percentage heifers calved 22, 26 months, so it's a bit low on the Mayo. So in Mayo, so nationally it's about 1 in 5, so 20%, 14% in Mayo. The average age of heifers is just under 33 months, so it's about a half a month older than the national average. And bit higher AI sired calves, and you would expect that with smaller herds, more of a usage of AI. So almost 1 in every 4 calves in Mayo would be AI sired versus less than 1 in 5 nationally. So just to give a bit of an update on the changes that came into the indexes in September, a lot of you might have read about it on social media or in the farming media. They were well documented. There was an update to the economic model. So this is the prices that are used in the indexes, and that's generated by Teagasc in the farm systems model, which is worked on by Paul Crossan and Grange. There was an improvement made to how we take in foreign data. So this is really probably of interest to pedigree breeders or people maybe bringing in foreign stock bulls or importing foreign females or bringing in semen from abroad. And the beef skep weighing data. So this was initially held out from evaluations. Look, there were some concerns about the quality of the data. And what ICBF had to do was we had to put a sort of a system in place whereby we would be able to screen out as much as possible any incorrect or I suppose false data really. So the economic model, look, there's quite a lot in this, but I'll just highlight a few. So as it was well documented, there was an increase in the price of carcass. So you'll see it went from €4.68 up to just under €6. And that's because of the increase in farm gate prices in the last, particularly 12 months, where beef price has gone very, very high. Now, you might say, well, at the moment, beef price isn't far off €8 a kilo. Why is it €2 less? And that's because this is based on projections using EOCD figures, World Bank, various different international sources that Paul Cross in Grange would be using. So it's not just a case of the beef price today in Ireland is a base price of 7.50 a kilo. We can just set it at 7.50. It has to be reputable sources that are used. And bear in mind what we're also trying to do here is trying to best estimate what the beef price will be in 5, 6, 7, 8 years time. Okay. Now it is likely that this will increase again next year as new reports and new projections come out on the price of beef. But until then, that is the price that's included. And because of that increase in beef price, you also see the increase in cull cow or the value of cull cows going up as well. There's been a bit of a decrease in a few traits then, such as calving difficulty and survival. So the interesting one about those is that because the price of beef has increased, and particularly the price of the cull cow, the penalty for difficult calving is actually less in the indexes because take, for example, if you had a difficult calving and you had the misfortune of losing a calf, the economic cost of losing a calf is not as much because the cull value of the cow is now so high. So because of that, the penalty on calving difficulty is lower. And also on survival. So, cows that go through difficult calvings or cows that lose calves are more than likely going to be culled. So again, the cost of replacing them isn't as severe because the cull cow value is so high. So where are the Eurostar percentiles or the star cutoff values, to put it more simply? So this is where we stand on the replacement and terminal indexes, a comparison between May and September. So look, the replacement index values have stayed virtually the same, a euro difference there at the top end. The terminal index has seen a bit of a change, all right. So at the top end, there's now a higher bar to be a 5-star. And at the lower end, there's a lower bar is supposed to become a 1-star. And that's because of that increased emphasis on beef price in the index, that there's more of a divergence between the highest terminal index animals and the lower indexed animals. Hence why you're seeing that bigger separation in the difference between the 1-star cutoff and the 5-star cutoff. So we just did some analysis on the new figures and looked at we took cows, so Irish suckler cows, based on their new indexes, so the September 2025 evals. We looked at all weanlings sold in 2025, so all weanlings sold since the 1st of January 2025 up until, I suppose, around the end of September. And we looked at the indexes of their dams and broke them down from 1 to 5-star. So there is a table with the 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, but just to keep it simpler, we just did a comparison between the 1s and 5s. So when we look at weanling weight, there was a difference of 24 kilos. So the 5-star cows had 331 kilo calves versus 306 for the 1s. In terms of the value, so the weanling price, so we get all of this data from the marts. So we get the weight and we get the price the animals were sold for. €131 difference in the sale price. The price per kilo look, there was about a cent in the difference. It's not even a cent after, it's less than half a cent. So there was virtually no difference in the actual price per kilo. Then we look at the fertility of those dams. So when they calved down for the first time, the 5-star dams were over 2.5 months younger at the age of first calving. Their subsequent average calving interval is just under 40 days less, so about 5.5 to 6 weeks less of a calving interval. And when that translates into calves per cow per year, you're looking at 0.93 versus 0.85, so 0.08. So, in every, I suppose, in every 100 calves, in every 100 suckler cows, the 5-star cows are producing 8 calves more over the 1-star cows. So that's quite a significant difference. Now, what we did then was we looked at the impact on a herd to a herd level. So a lot of these herd selling weanlings are on the smaller side. So we looked at the impact for a 10-cow suckler herd where they're selling all the calves as weanlings. So what we did is we took the price, multiplied it by the calves per cow per year, and multiplied it by 10 to get the herd revenue from sales. Okay, so the herd of 1-star animals coming in at 14,000 versus over 16.5 for the 5s. So over 2,600 euros difference in overall revenue, which when you divide it by 10, your 10 cows, it's over 260 euros per cow. So there's quite a substantial difference there in the revenue generated between the 5 and the 1-star cows. When you look at the impact on a finishing system, we actually took the herd size a little bit higher here because these integrated systems or integrated herds tend to be a little bit bigger. The herds taking their animals right through to finish tend to be that bit larger. Again, did a comparison. So we took all of the progeny slaughtered so far in 2025. Quite a large subset of animals in there. We looked at the replacement index. This is all suckler bred progeny, just to emphasize. Compare the dams from 1 to 5-star. When you look at age at finish, so the progeny from 5-star dams were 50 days younger. They were also 2 kilos heavier on carcass weight. The carcass price, there was 35 euros difference. When we look at the calving interval of the dams, there was the 5-star dams were 27 days better off, or nearly nearly 4 weeks, just under a month. And calves per cow per year, 0.9 versus 0.96. So every 100 cows here, there's 6 more calves coming from those 5-star cows versus the 1-star cows for every 100 of those cows. When you multiply it up at a herd level, so what we did here is we took the carcass price, multiplied by the calves per cow per year, and multiplied by 25. That gives you for the 1-star cows just over 65,500 and 70,500 for the 5-star. So there's over 5,000 euros there at a herd level. And again, per cow, so take the difference and divide it by your 25 cows, it gives you 208 euros per cow. So there is a big impact there. Those higher index cows, they're producing heavier, higher value weanlings, and producing animals that are, killing out with heavier carcasses and making more money. And bear in mind that this difference in revenue here is before you take into account the 50 days of extra feeding. That figure has not been included in there. So, I mean, you could be talking at, I'm not 100% sure what the cost of finishing diets would be, but I mean, they could be north of 3 to 4 euros a day to finish animals. So at 50 days, I mean, you could be talking well over 200 euros in the difference in feed cost there. So that's quite significant. So just to do a comparison of your average 5-star cow on the old and the new indexes. So in May 2025, the average 5-star cow, she had a carcass weight figure. So that's her genetic merit for carcass of 11 kilos. Her milk figure was 7.4 and calving interval was minus 2.04. So, pretty good figures there. Carcass might have been a bit low, but good positive milk figure and a negative calving interval figure, which is what you want to see because you want to take days off your calving interval. On the September 2025, carcass weight is a bit higher, so it's a 2 kilo increase. Milk, look, a little bit of a decrease, but more or less the same, and calving interval or fertility is the same. So I suppose to sum it up, the 5-star cow is just now that little bit beefier than she was before, which is, I think most suckler farmers are kind of happy to see that there's maybe more of an emphasis on the carcass traits in the replacement index. So just a few slides on, a basic how to use the Eurostar indexes. So if you're maybe considering buying a stock bull, using an AI bull, maybe looking at the indexes of females you're potentially going buying. Where do you start and how do you interpret the figures and use them? Okay, so the first place you start is with the overall index. Okay, now ask yourself, what am I trying to produce in my system? And that will tell you what index you want to use. Okay, so the replacement index is where you're buying a bull. You want to breed replacements. The terminal index is where all the progeny are going for slaughter. And the DBI, look, not really applicable to this audience, but for pedigree breeders that are breeding bulls and targeting them at the dairy market, or a dairy farmer looking to use a beef bull on their dairy cows would use the DBI. And the stars tell you where the animal ranks. Okay, so if we take the terminal index here, for example, okay, within the breed, so this just happens to be a Simmental bull. So our terminal index at 94 euros puts this bull at 4 stars within the Simmental breed. But then across all the other breeds, comparing them to Charolais, Limousines, Blues, every other breed, it puts them at a 3-star. So, the stars are very useful. They tell you immediately at a glance, where this bull ranks. The next thing you look at is the traits that you need. Okay, so you could have 2 herds, 2 farmers, and they both want to breed their own replacements, but the strengths and weaknesses of their cows could be very different. Okay, so one farmer could be dealing with predominantly maybe first cross animals off the dairy herd. So he's probably going to be quite high on milk, but low on carcass. Okay. The next farmer might be dealing with a predominantly, beefier suckler bred animal, more continental in nature, probably quite high on carcass, and might be lacking maybe a bit of milk and fertility. So both of those farmers want higher replacement index bulls, but they'll want different traits within the index. So what the farmer that's lacking carcass, for example, is going to be focusing on is carcass weight. Okay, so they want that figure to be as high as possible because their cows are probably already quite high on daughter milk and daughter calving interval. And the opposite goes for the farmer with the more carcassy type cows. They're probably already quite high in this, whereas their focus is predominantly going to be on the milk and fertility more than likely. So it all depends on what you want the animals to produce, and that tells you the traits you want to focus on. It's also important to watch the reliability, and that's particularly important when it comes to calving difficulty, okay? Especially where you're using bulls on heifers. Not so easy with a stock bull. Most herds just have one stock bull, and when they buy a new stock bull, probably is to do the job for all of the heifers and cows. Much easier with AI. You can ensure that you're using high reliability, easy calving bulls on your heifers. So high reliability, you're talking about 90+% reliability, which would be, as good as proven. Okay. If you're using new bulls, low reliability bulls, it's important to try and use multiple bulls. So this is very much a concept used by dairy farmers, teams of bulls, so they're using high EBI young bulls, but they're using lots of them. So look, it's probably not as much or as well practiced by suckler farmers, but it's probably no harm just to maybe spread your risk over a few bulls. There's probably in some herds, and just from talking to people in the AI industry and AI technicians, farmers maybe over rely on very small numbers of bulls. And we see that in the usage of bulls in the AI stats as well. The top 3 or 4 bulls tend to be way ahead of all of the rest in terms of usage. But what low reliability doesn't mean is don't use the bull, okay? Like if all farmers avoided low reliability bulls, then when all of the proven bulls run out, or when all of the semen from those bulls runs out, we're not going to have any more proven bulls. So we do need to keep testing new bulls. Albeit like not across maybe your whole herd, but on some of your cows. And avoiding them on heifers and using them on older cows is probably the best thing when using test bulls. It's just a question we get asked sometimes. Should I just focus on the traits? So be that carcass, be that milk that I want, and ignore the overall index. So this would be suggesting that, a farmer would just say, right, I want docility and I want milk. Therefore, this bull looks quite good, 5 stars for docility. Milk is quite strong for 5 stars as well. But the important thing is that the overall index still needs to be used. So this bull's overall replacement index is very low. And the reason being that when you go back to the other traits, yes, it's high in milk, but its fertility is very poor. So you have a high positive figure, so you don't want that. This bull is going to be adding days to your calving interval because the daughters of this bull have poor fertility. And the carcass traits are quite low as well. So poor carcass weight and poor on conformation. Okay. So that's why the overall index is still the start point. If the overall index of the bull is low, then the bull realistically shouldn't be used. Important to balance the index. So this is just an example of some cows. Look, they're from different herds. I just wanted all of 5-star cows with different traits and trait strengths and weaknesses. So if we look at the top cow, very high index, 170 euros, but she also is probably at the extreme end on carcass. Okay, now that's all very well and good from her own genetics and the genetics she'll pass on to her calf. But the likelihood is as well that that cow will possibly be very big herself. Okay, and that you're then getting into the economics of these very large cows. Is it economically viable to keep them? I suppose. Look, it all depends on the type of calf they're producing. If they are producing a very good calf, then it is going to be viable. This cow still is a very good index because she has that high carcass, but her daughter milk and fertility figures are quite good as well. You then go to the other extreme, still a 5-star cow, albeit a lower index, but like totally different type of cow here. She actually has a negative carcass weight and a fairly extremely negative there. So 14 and 44, there's 58 kilos of difference in the genetic merit for carcass weight between these two cows, but she's quite extreme then for milk and fertility. Okay. I mean, going to this extreme, like you're going to need a very high carcass merit bull to make up for that deficit in that cow. So you're really going to be limited in the number of bulls that can be used. But then we look in the middle, we have 3 cows, still 5-star cows and different trait strengths and weaknesses still. We're going from a 4-star on carcass down to a 1-star on carcass. But what we have here are much more balanced cows, okay? And that's really what you're trying to achieve with the figures, is trying to get a balance between those growth traits or those output traits, carcass weight, conformation, but also the cost of production ones. So your milk, your fertility, because cow has to pass on good genetics to the calf, absolutely, in terms of carcass, but she has to have milk and fertility as well to perform and to function as a suckler cow. Can a herd be strong across all traits? It absolutely can. No, it's not easy. Probably takes very selective breeding, probably easier to achieve with AI as well. A farmer can use lots of different bulls. He can match bulls to cows based on their specific strengths and weaknesses. But it is possible to have, a very high replacement index and good traits across the board as well. So you've heard here, high carcass weight, not too extreme, good daughter milk, so a good positive milk figure, and a negative calving interval figure. If anything could probably be improved there, could probably go a bit more negative on that calving interval figure. So that's it from me. I'll hand you back to Brendan, and I think the plan is that we would take some questions at the end, is the plan.
That's brilliant, Chris, and thank you very much for that excellent presentation. Definitely contains some useful and interesting stats there. So we'll give you a chance there for a break there, Chris. And at this stage of the evening, I'll now introduce our next speaker this evening. Our next speaker is Seamus Nolan. Seamus is a scheme sports specialist there based in Teagasc Castlerea. And Seamus is going to talk to us now about TAMS this evening, TAMS 3, and indeed what's new and what's there available for farmers there across the region there to apply for. So over to you now, Seamus.
Okay, thanks, Brendan. Okay, so look, I'll give a quick run through as best I can in relation to TAMS, TAMS 3, and I suppose what I'm really highlighting here is, I suppose, clarifying a few issues where people get confused about, and maybe pointing out a few issues where people can avoid pitfalls in relation to applications and claims. like it's we say give or take 20 minutes or so to 25 minutes to run through this. TAMS to run through it in 20-25 minutes is practically impossible, like, because there's so much involved in it, and we won't even get into both the majority of what investments are available. We'll touch on some of them all right, but the list is so long that we'll be here all night going through them. So look, we'll proceed anyway, and as Brendan said, we'll answer the questions at the end. So just go to move on for me now. Right now. Okay, so first of all, I'm not going to dwell on this slide too long. There is about 11 or 12 schemes in total in TAMS. Okay, so I have 9 of them listed here, and the 9 I've listed here would be more relevant to possibly the people that are on this call tonight. So I've left out the likes of the tillage scheme. There's a nutrient storage scheme. They're the main ones I've left out. So the remaining 9 then. Okay, so the top 6 ones, okay, just to point out, they have a combined investment ceiling. All right, so your investment ceiling is determined by the entity that you're applying under. So when I say about the entity, it's what form your herd number is. So if your herd number is registered in your own individual name, well, then you're applying as an individual. If your herd number is in a company name, you're applying as a company, if your herd number is in a registered farm partnership, you're applying as a registered farm partnership. The other one, then main one, is a joint venture. So that's a joint herd number between 2 individuals. It's not a registered farm partnership, it's just a joint venture. We'll talk a little bit about those in another slide. So the main thing here, I suppose, is that each scheme has its own list of investments, and each scheme some schemes have different grant rate that's available. Okay, so we can see there that the Animal Welfare and Nutrient Storage Scheme has a 40% grant rate, and the investment ceiling there for an individual or a company is 90,000. Okay, so a registered farm partnership, where you see the 2 asterisks beside it there, has an enhanced ceiling there of 160,000. The main thing here, I suppose, is that if you're a young farmer, you must apply under the Young Farmer Capital Investment Scheme to get your 60% grant rate. You can see that a lot of the schemes have a standard rate of 60% grant, whether you're a young farmer or woman farmer, or just, I would say, call an ordinary farmer. So an ordinary farmer is basically somebody who's not a young farmer, doesn't qualify as a young farmer, doesn't qualify as a woman farmer. So we'll say the organic farming scheme, if you're an organic farmer, you get a standard grant rate of 60%. If you're applying under the Farm Safety Capital Investment Scheme, that's available at 60% to all applicants. And then you have the remaining 3 schemes, which have their own independent investment ceiling. So the first 6 have a combined investment ceiling. What that basically means is that if I, as an individual, spend 40,000 under the dairy equipment scheme, okay, and my ceiling is 90,000, that means I've only 50,000 left to spend under the Animal Welfare and Nutrient Storage Scheme. Okay. Now, when I come down to the Solar Capital Investment Scheme has its own independent ceiling of 90,000. So if I spend 40,000 on the dairy equipment scheme, I still have 90,000 to spend under the solar equipment scheme, but they're not linked. It's the same for the low emission slurry spreading scheme. I can spend 40,000 on that, and that's available at 60%. A registered farm partnership gets 60,000 ceiling there. And for the nutrient storage scheme, which is one of the last schemes to be introduced, and we'll talk a bit about that more later on, that's a standard 60% ceiling for everybody. So that basically means is that I have 90,000 to spend on nutrient storage. So essentially what that means is for people, they have 90,000 to spend on slurry storage, and if they have nothing else used out of their young farmer scheme or their animal welfare and nutrient storage scheme, they could have 90,000 as well left to put a shed over. Okay, so just following on from that, then, where a lot of mistakes are made are in relation to applying under the correct scheme. So if you are an eligible young farmer, right, and you want to apply for a bulk tank, we'll say, okay, you don't apply under the dairy equipment scheme for that. You apply under the Young Farmer Capital Investment Scheme, and that's important. All the investments that are available to what we call ordinary farmers, non-young farmers and non-women farmers, all investments that are available under the Animal Welfare and Nutrient Storage Scheme and the Dairy Equipment Scheme are also available under the Young Farmer Capital Investment Scheme. They're also available under the Women Farmer Capital Investment Scheme and the Organic Farming Capital Investment Scheme, okay? So if you want to apply to get the 60% grant on those, you have to apply under the correct scheme. If you were a young farmer and you make a mistake and you apply for a bulk tank under the dairy equipment scheme, you'll get approved, but you'll only get the 40% grant on it. And the department can't do anything about that. They can't transfer it over to the Young Farmer Capital Investment Scheme. You have to withdraw your application and reapply if you want to get the 60% grant. That's an important one. Just a few minutes, I suppose, in relation to investment ceilings and what grant rate is applied. So I'll go back to one of the first things I said. There are a number of different entities that I suppose herd numbers are kind of registered in. So you have your individuals, that's when your herd numbers in your own name, and a company is another common enough one, or getting more common. Okay, so an individual and a company are treated the same from TAMS purposes. The next one you have then is registered farm partnership. Okay, and we have a few scenarios in relation to that. And the last one then is a joint venture or a joint herd number. So in relation to a company or an individual who is a non-young farmer or a non-woman farmer, right? So a company can qualify as a woman farmer or a young farmer if the woman or the young farmer has a 20% share in the company. Okay, so and they're treated the same as an individual. A company is treated as a legal individual, whereas an individual is a natural individual. So they will qualify. A company or an individual who's an ordinary farmer will say 40% grant rate, and it's 90,000 ceiling. If you have a company or an individual then who is an eligible young farmer or woman farmer, they will get 60% on an investment ceiling of 90,000. Okay, and the company or the young farmer there, or the woman farmer or the young farmer must have a 20% shareholding in the company to qualify for that. If you have a registered farm partnership with one young farmer or one woman farmer, okay, you'll qualify for 60%, and your investment ceiling then will go up to 160,000. So you'll get the first 90,000 at 60% and the balance at 40%. Okay. If you have a registered farm partnership with two young farmers or two women farmers, all right, you get 60% on the full 160,000. If you have a registered farm partnership with no young farmer or no woman farmer, so it could be a partnership that was set up 5 or 6 years ago when initially there was a young farmer involved. It no longer qualifies as a young farmer, but the registered farm partnership is still going. You will get the 40% grant on the full 160,000. Okay, now you will still qualify that the 40% is the standard rate of grant, I suppose. You will still qualify for the 60% grant rate under the solar nutrient storage scheme, organic and less, because that's the grant rate that applies to those schemes. But in general, it'll be the 40% grant rate you apply for. Now we follow on then to a joint venture, and this is where some people get caught and get a bit confused. So a joint venture is essentially a joint herd number. It's just where you might have added your son or your daughter or your wife to the herd number, or the way around, whatever the case may be. It's not in a registered farm partnership, just basically a tax partnership. It's not registered with the department in any way. So if you have a joint venture between a father and an eligible young farmer, right, they'll only ever qualify for a 40% grant rate at 90,000, okay, as the standard rate. Whereas if they were in a registered farm partnership, they get 60% of 160,000, okay? If you have a joint venture between two young farmers or two women farmers, they will qualify for 60% of 90,000. So a joint venture will only qualify for a 90,000 investment ceiling. Okay, it's not a registered farm partnership. In order to get the enhanced ceiling of 160,000, you have to be in a registered farm partnership. If you have a joint venture between a husband and wife, okay, so there you have an ordinary farmer, would say, and an eligible woman farmer. They will only get 40% of 90,000. Okay, and a joint venture between one woman farmer and a young farmer will only qualify for 40% as well of a 90,000 investment ceiling. So we follow on then for eligibility. So look, at eligibility is quite straightforward, but majority, the basics, annual welfare and nutrient storage scheme and etc. If you have to have 5 hectares on a BIS application prior to application, you have to have a department identifier, obviously. For equine related investments, then you have to have 3 equines declared on a census. So for some investments, you know, they're related to a particular enterprise, and there are specific eligibility criteria related to those investments, I suppose, as such. If you're a tillage farmer, right, or a tillage related investment, you have to have 15 hectares of tillage crops on your BIS application prior to submitting your application. For For fencing, so to qualify for sheep fencing, you must have a sheep enterprise. To qualify for bovine fencing, you must have a bovine enterprise. Okay, so common question we get in is that I have no sheep, but I want to put up sheep fencing. Can I get TAMS on it? No, you can't. So you'd have to get into sheep and maintain a sheep enterprise for 5 years, then post payment to claim to qualify for the sheep rate of fencing. In order to qualify for a low emission slurry spreading grant, you have to have 170 on your nitrates. That's prior to export. And for the nutrient storage scheme or any animal housing related investments, you have to be nitrates compliant, and we'll touch a bit on that later on as well. For milking machines, there's a limit there of 120 cows for an ordinary farmer, or 160 cows if you qualify for a young farmer. Anything above that, you're not eligible to qualify for a grant for a milking machine. There's no longer grants for feeders in parlours, that they're all gone. And in order to qualify for the milking machine investment, you have to have 10% surplus storage at the time of application. Okay. In terms of, when we get on to the young farmer then, and what's an eligible young farmer? So an eligible young farmer is somebody who is less than 41 at the time of submitting an application. So they can be in their 40th year, and they have to have their application submitted before they turn 41. And they have to be set up within the previous 5 years. So the date of set up is normally the date that they are put on the herd number. That's when the clock starts ticking in terms of the 5 years. In terms of a company, it's when they're made a director or shareholder in the company. Okay. They have to have the education requirements in order to claim the 60% grant. Now, you can apply for the young farmer 60% grant without having the education course completed. Even you can have it without even have it started. Okay, but you must have it completed before they'll pay the 60% grant to you. What they'll do is, if you have your investment done, they'll pay you the 40%, the standard 40% grant, and they won't pay you the top up 20% until you have proof. You provide proof that you have your education course completed. And there's the time frame there, I think off the top of my head, it's 36 months from the date of submission of the claim that you have to complete that training course. And if you're a registered farm partnership or a company, you must have a 20% shareholder, and you must maintain that for 5 years. Okay. For the women farmer, look at you have to be less than 67 at the time of submitting an application. If on the herd number that submitted the BPS form in 2022, there's no education requirements needed. But if you're only added on the herd number after the BIS form or BPS form was submitted in 2022, you need the green cert or equivalent. And again, if you're a registered farm partnership or company, you must have the 20% shareholder. So the application online it's an online. Look at normally scheme operates in tranches every 3 to 4 months. A tranche runs. The scheme is never essentially closed, but the department at the end of every 3 to 4 month tranche, the department process them applications that are submitted in each tranche. Then and that's about control and budget. And approval, it can take up to 6 months after the tranche date closes. Okay. In terms of the processing of applications, look at it runs through. It's all an online process. It runs through a number of different phases. There's an initial HQ check, and the final approval comes from a local office. And in the middle of all that is a nitrates check done on nitrates relevant investments. And if it's oversubscribed, which the scheme is currently at the minute, ranking and selection will kick in. And what ranking and selection basically means is that all applications will be given marks on preset criteria. And you can see here, this is the marking sheet for the animal welfare and nutrient storage scheme. So these are all predetermined factors that you have no control over. So you can't influence the marks that you can get under TAMS 3. You could under TAMS 2, but you cannot under TAMS 3. So things like the age of the applicant, payments under TAMS 2 for non-less investments are taken into account, the size of the holding or the enterprise, if you're in an A and C area or not, and your nitrates figure. So if the higher your nitrates figure is, the lower that you'll get a negative mark for that. And look at every application is ranked on the basis of that. The people with the highest marks, the highest points will go through, and the people with the lowest marks below a certain cutoff will be rolled over to the next tranche. You're not kicked out. You're rolled over to the next tranche. And if you don't get in through the next tranche, then your application will be kicked out then at that stage. Now, so very quickly through the nutrient storage scheme. So the nutrient storage scheme was announced there in January by the Minister. It's dedicated towards nutrient storage, as it says. It has its own dedicated 90,000 ceiling, and our registered farm partnership has 160,000 ceiling. So any individual, whether you're a young farmer, woman farmer, or ordinary farmer, is eligible for 60% up to an investment ceiling of 90,000, and the registered farm partnership gets 60% up to full 160,000. So it's quite valuable. And the investments are in the animal welfare and nutrient storage scheme, the organic scheme, the women's scheme, and the young farmer scheme. So the 4 main investments included here are basically mass concrete tanks, slurry tanks, geomembrane lined stores, circular slurry stores, the overground steel stores, and manure pits. So the 2 most popular, or the most popular one there, is obviously the mass concrete tank, especially built in a slat shed. In terms of at the minute, a declaration of exemption or full planning permission is required for all nutrient storage application. So we'll talk a bit about that maybe in a minute. The other thing is that for nutrient storage and animal housing, you must be compliant with the current minimum storage requirements to apply. So you have to be nitrates compliant, basically. Okay, so what that basically means is that the department will look back at the most recent completed winter prior to application. They'll assess what stock numbers you have. You have to provide what details of slurry storage you had, and if you were over stocking rate of 100 in the previous year, you have to have your full, in Mayo, it's 18 weeks storage for those animals. Okay, 6 weeks for sheep, 18 weeks for bovines. If you're less than 100, then you can use what's called reduced storage, or you can say that some animals are outwintered. So there's been a bit of a tightening on that. The previous cutoff figure was 130 for nitrates, but it changed to 100 from the 1st of January 2025. And that compliance will be checked for all applicants for nutrient-related investments. It's an important one. In terms of the reference costs, so there'll be a lot of talk in media recently about reference costs, and reference costs have increased, and they have. So I just run through a quick example here. I know the drawing there, the dimensions on it mightn't be clear. It's just to show what I did the rough costings are on. It's a 4-bay single slatted shed with a creep area at the back. So what I did on that was I just worked out what would the department costings be on that structure, okay, and what change of anything over the previous costings would be involved there. So look, to summarise it really, for that 4-bay shed with your 4-bay tank underneath, there's an increase in overall costings between the new ones and the previous ones of just over €7,000, which would potentially result in an increased grant of 3,300. So look at it's about 10% or less, a little bit less of an overall increase in costings. So it mightn't be just as lucrative as people thought that it was going to be. Now, while it still will be attractive to some people, if you have an application already in the system, so the new costings only apply to applications that were submitted in the September tranche on. So if you had an application that was submitted prior to that, you're in under the old costings, and the new costings won't apply to you. Some people will be tempted to withdraw their application and reapply to get the new costings. All I'd say to them is just work out what benefit it is to you. If you're already in the system, there's a fair chance that you will get approval, whereas if you're in since September, ranking and selection will more than likely apply, and you're not actually guaranteed approval. And then there's the time frame involved as well as what it's taken to get approved. So if you submit an application now again, you're in the December tranche, it'll be next June or July potentially before you have your approval. And can you afford to wait that long for the sake of maybe potentially an additional 3,000 in grant, you know? Going back to the planning permission quite quickly, despite all the talk that's in the media at the minute, and there has been bits and pieces about it over the last number of months, and about that farm buildings are going to be exempt from planning permission. Currently, if you're applying today for TAMS, you need full and final planning permission for any investment that needs planning permission. It's not the initial grant, right? So after planning permission, you get an initial decision from the local authority. That's not good enough. You have to wait the additional 4 weeks to get your final grant. If you submitted with the initial grant, your application will be rejected. So an exemption then, so you either go for planning or an exemption. So if something requires planning permission, you either upload full planning permission with it or a declaration of exemption, both which have to come from the local authority. The local authority grants the exemption as well. Now, the exemption limits are under review, and there's a decision due on that soon enough. And what they're saying there is that currently the limit for a new build is 200 square meters, provided that the aggregate within 100 meters of that new build, and including the new build, does not exceed 300 square meters. You could be planning exempt. The proposal there is to increase the size of the new shed to 300 square meters and the aggregate to 450. So that's supposedly in the final stages of approval by it's not the Department of Agriculture that approves that now, it's the Department of the Environment, I think. Okay. There's also proposed exemption on storage up to 1,000 cubic meters. But again, it won't be a case of you can fire ahead and throw up structures wherever you want. This exemption will have to come from the local authority. It's a lot quicker process than getting planning permission. It's generally having an answer within 8 weeks. There's no submissions by third parties allowed. So generally it's a more straightforward application process. Just touch on solar, because there's a lot of confusion about solar out there, and we get a lot of questions into it in relation to it. It's a standard 60% ceiling or a grant rate for all applicants, with a 90K ceiling, regardless of whether you're in a partnership or not, is 90,000 ceiling. And the size of the system is governed on the base of your energy usage over the previous 12 months. And that has to be, you have to supply ESB bills or electricity energy bills to prove your ESB usage. Okay, so that determines the max size of the system that the department will grant aid. Okay, one dwelling, the energy usage of one dwelling house can be included in that. Okay, in terms of a battery, you can get a grant on a battery, and that's limited to 50% of the PV output. So if you put in a 10 kilowatt solar system, you're limited to 5 kilowatt of battery then that you can apply on. Okay. Now, panels must be installed on an agricultural building or ground mounted. Okay, and there has to be an agricultural use from the electricity generator. So you cannot put the panels on a dwelling house. The inverter and the battery and all that can be put in the dwelling house, but the panels cannot. Okay, because in a lot of cases, particularly dry stock yards, smaller yards, the energy or the electricity from the house is fed out towards the yard. So the meter is in the house. That's where the inverter will go, and the battery will go there as well. That's where the system will be connected in. But your panels will have to go on an agricultural building. And despite what a lot of energy solar companies think, you can export to the grid and get paid for it. And that's the nature of how solar systems work. You cannot physically, if you have a nice bright day, you cannot physically use all the electricity that the system will generate on a nice bright day. And it works on light as opposed to sunshine. Okay, it works on daylight. So with that in mind, like, you know, and if you have a battery and the battery is charged, you can then export any additional that's produced to the grid and get paid for it. The key here is that the size of your system is based on your energy usage over the previous 12 months. You cannot size a system to enable you to export a pile of electricity to the grid. Okay, if you're able to export based on the size of the system that you're granted, so be it, and you will do that. And every system will export a certain amount to the grid. Now, you can install a bigger system than you're allowed under TAMS at your own expense. It doesn't have to be a separate system, but you'll only get TAMS on whatever your solar survey says on your energy for the previous 12 months. Now, for some smaller users of electricity, and I'm conscious that dry stock farmers, some of the usage can be low enough. You can apply for, if TAMS doesn't suit you, there is an SAI grant there of €800. Very quickly, in relation to health and safety training requirements, so in order to process, before your claim can be processed, somebody has to have a health and safety course done. Now, if the applicant is a young farmer and has the Green Cert done in the previous 5 years, that will suffice. Other than that, they must have a half-day health and safety course completed. If it's an application under the young farmer scheme, it's the young farmer must complete the course. If it's an application under the women farmer scheme, it's the woman farmer must complete the course. If it's a company, it can be a farm manager or a director or that's provided there's no young farmer or woman farmer in the company. If it's a joint herd number, any one person on the herd number can apply. Okay, and it must be the half-day health and safety course for TAMS. Now, a big one here is finance and equipment, and this is where we see issues with this every week. It cannot be financed by a third party, and this is particularly an issue when it comes to equipment. No problem getting a bank loan. A bank loan isn't third party financing because the bank will lodge the money into your bank account. You pay, write a check then out to the supplier. Okay, so that is important that the money for the investment has to pass through your bank account. Okay, in terms of and this bottom one here, I suppose I'll focus on this one for a minute, where some people get caught, is that if you're an individual and you're paying for a piece of equipment, right, and it should pass through the farm bank account. Provided now, where some people get caught here is that if you are farming on your own herd number and your wife is farming on her own herd number, or your son is farming on his own herd number, and you have a joint bank account for farming details, for farming purposes for some reason, okay, that's a problem. So you cannot pay for a piece of equipment or an investment out of a joint bank account with another farmer. Okay, you can pay for it out of a joint bank account, provided that the other person is not farming. That's no problem. But if the other person is a farmer, even though it's your wife or your husband or whatever the case may be, that's a problem. We have several cases in relation to that. If you're buying a new piece of equipment, for example, a slurry tanker, you can trade in an existing piece of equipment and use it as a deposit and get TAMS on the full piece of equipment. Okay. In terms of mobile,
a couple of minutes now, Seamus. Okay.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah. In terms of mobile versus fixed investments, some investments are classified as mobile or fixed. So you can see up in the top right hand corner here, fixed investments, right? A fixed investment, a deposit can be. So any expenditure after submission of an application is eligible. Any expenditure before submission of an application is ineligible. So you can pay for a fixed investment or pay a deposit on a fixed investment after submission of an application, but you cannot install it prior to approval. For mobile equipment, you can pay for it and get it after your submission of your application. Okay. Okay, we just skipped through that in the interest of time. An important one here is general information, I suppose, in relation to the 5-year rule. So once you're paid TAMS on an investment, you have an obligation for that investment for 5 years from the date of payment of claim. So you have to use it for the purposes that was granted. Okay. In terms of technologies that are there and available to farmers, and we're nearly there now, Brendan. Look, there's a list of stuff there. Chris was talking about, I suppose, genetic technologies. These are I suppose more physical technologies in relation to equipment, etc., that are there under the different schemes. So the popular ones, I suppose, are calf rearing equipment, pasture management in terms of seeders and mulchers, solar electric fences, health and fertility monitoring, or for monitoring cows and coming in heat. Wood chippers are popular enough. If we look under the farm safety scheme, which everybody's eligible at 60%, animal handling facilities are there, and very useful grant at 60%. Fixed and mobile equipment there. The bale slice is also there, and it's very popular as well. In terms of other technologies, then the generator is there all the time for all farmers, available under the dairy equipment scheme for non-young farmers or non-women farmers, and the solar and the low emission, as we mentioned that. Very quickly, we've gone through a lot of these already. The common errors and mistakes what people make in relation to applications, and I mentioned the first thing I mentioned was applying under the correct scheme to get the correct rate for the investment that you want. Okay. Also, if you're submitting an application yourself, you have to have 2,000 euros of a minimum investment on submission of the application. If you don't have that, your application will be rejected. There's other issues. Then I mentioned them already: payment from incorrect bank accounts, expenditure before submission of an application, and I would encourage people who have claims pending, etc. Don't leave it to the last minute to contact your advisor or even start submitting a claim yourself, because it can take a lot of time to get your ducks in a row and get all the paperwork right. You need more paperwork than you actually think in some cases, and may take a bit of time, and you could run out of time in relation to that. That's kind of it, Brendan. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much there, Seamus. A brilliant presentation. And indeed, look at great stuff there, indeed, in relation to TAMS. So at this stage of the evening now, I'll now call on my colleague Alan Nolan from Teagasc and Ballinrobe. And indeed, thanks again to all the participants this evening for their presentations. And indeed, thanks to our attendees this evening for all the questions who have been put in so far in the Q&A. We have a good lot of questions. We have over 120 farmers on this evening. So Alan and Nolan, I'll hand it over to you. And
thanks, Brendan, there. Yeah, thanks, Brendan. And
bring Chris
well done
back in
to
again.
Chris and Seamus on two very good presentations there. And look, as Brendan said at the very beginning, the two topics are quite different. So I'll try and group the questions as best I can. And there's actually a good few questions in. So if we don't get to them all, we'll get back to them in the next day, as Brendan has said there. So just firstly there to yourself, Chris, I suppose just going back to your very first slide there, you had some very interesting figures on the number of cows in Mayo here, and it shows a big drop of nearly 20,000 cows between 2013 to 2025, which is a huge drop. Would that be a similar drop or a similar trend, Chris, to national figures, or has counties like Mayo and the West had a more dramatic reduction in numbers?
No, look, it's pretty similar across the board. If anything, probably the West of Ireland might have seen a slightly lower percentage drop because there's probably less alternative enterprises. You probably have bigger percentage drops in the South and Southeast where a lot of guys had the option to go dairying, or maybe some of them just got out of sucklers and went into dry stock, you know. So look, it's pretty in line with the West of Ireland, but there's probably an even bigger percentage decrease in parts of the Southeast, you know, your Waterfords, your Kilkennys, your Carlows, where a lot of herds would have gone dairying. Now, the numbers of those herds numbers starting off would have been smaller, but on a percentage decrease, they're probably higher.
Yeah. Okay, Chris. Look at the question in here. I'm planning to start a suckler herd. I have 2, 3, 4-star heifer weanlings I reared from weanlings. Are they good enough for a suckler herd? And what AI easy calving bulls would you recommend? I don't know, do you know them, Chris, off the top of your head?
So look, the first part of the farmer's question is, you know, are they good enough? I mean, look, if a farmer is happy with the animals in front of them, you know, then by all means, I suppose, look, the genetic index is a guide as to what their potential is. Look, if they have low indexes, what it's saying is, look, their genetics could be better. But like, I suppose, considering you have them on the ground and with the price of cattle, it's probably not feasible just to get rid of them and go out and buy a whole fleet of new ones. So you have to start somewhere. You can make improvement in through genetics in terms of the bulls, and like the farmer's better off talking to an AI company there to know what they would recommend to use on heifers, you know. ICBF wouldn't be marketing any bulls or anything like that.
You're not going to go there, Chris. And just another one here, and it mightn't exactly be your field, it could be one from more of the department as well. Why isn't AI codes on the blue ID cards for easy to inbreed calves?
Yeah, so when you look at the blue card, the only compulsory piece of information on that is the breed of the sire. You don't actually have to put down the bull's actual tag number AI code. The only ID number required on that is the TAMS one. And that's down to EU legislation. You're not legally required to have a sire recorded. Now you do for the schemes. So if you're in the SCEP scheme, you have to record a sire because you're being paid for it. But you know, the actual ID of the sire isn't going to appear on the blue card unless that becomes European legislation. Look, I wouldn't be 100% sure. I couldn't see it happening anytime soon. What will probably overcome that is, you know, hopefully within the next maybe 5 to 10 years, if we have 100% national genotyping at birth, then you probably would be in a position where the sire ID could go on a blue card potentially, you know. One way of overcoming that is there could potentially be a sire recorded on the animal if the farmer looks up their herd plus profile. You know, the farmer it won't be on the blue card, but it would be there on an ICBF if you look up the animal.
Okay, and just one more there for you, Chris. You said there the update to the index was the first since 23. And so will the indexes there, will they be updated every few years? And I suppose just to explain again, why is this? And maybe does that lead, it's often commented that I hear, does that lead to a bit of uncertainty when farmers are selecting bulls and heifers for breeding, when you have that change?
Yeah, so the main indexes there in September just gone were to the economics, right, which is Paul Crossan's work in Grange. How often they're updated depends on costs, so fertilizer, meal, land rental, and also the output, so beef price. So if in 12 months' time another couple of euros goes on to beef price, for example, then it would have to be reviewed again. And likewise, if beef in a few years' time is a lot less, it would be reviewed and it would be reviewed down. So it's difficult to give an exact answer as to how often they're updated. It all depends on markets, the cost of input or the cost of inputs and the beef price and the output side.
Okay, Chris, I'll let you have a rest, Chris. I'll get on to Seamus here. There's quite a number of TAMS questions here. So, Seamus, I'll just try and keep the answers fairly brief if you can. So the first one there is, what are some of the reasons why people may not get the TAMS grant that they apply for? Is there any reasons that they wouldn't get it?
Yeah, so there's actually few, not many really, you know. So if they don't submit an application with a minimum investment of 2,000 euros, right, that'll be rejected. If they fail the nitrates check, okay, if it's nitrates related investment, they won't get it. If they submit an application that requires planning permission, and they don't submit it with the full and final planning permission or the declaration of exemption, it'll be rejected. So there are just a few examples of things where applications would be rejected. Now there's different issues then with, I suppose, if you get approved and you end up with no grant, like you get hit with a 100% penalty for some reason. That could be varying degrees of things, and would say the final investment not up to specification and can't be rectified or whatever would be a main one there, like, you know.
Yeah. Okay. Now, this is a fairly long question here, Seamus, but we'll try. A farmer here said that they're projected to be at 106 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare. That's what they're projecting for next year, and they're hoping to build a new slatted shed under TAMS in 26. Will this affect me qualifying for TAMS, or can I say that I'm overwintering some stock if I don't have enough slurry storage? And just maybe explain those slurry storage requirements in relation to TAMS.
Okay, so the first thing is, right, going back to the 106. So if the person that submitted the question there, if they're applying in 2026 and their grasslands, their stocking rate for nitrates for 2025 is 106, right? And we'd say if they submit an application prior to May, okay, 2026, then it gets a bit complicated. The department look at the most recent completed winter, okay, for stock numbers, etc. So in this instance, essentially the winter is deemed to be completed in early May. What they take is the 1st of December and they count forward 22 weeks from that, and that brings you up until early May. So if an application is submitted at the end of April, right, the most recent completed winter it would say April 2026, the most recent completed winter then would be the winter of 24-25, okay? If they submit the application in the end of May 2026, the most recent completed winter then is the winter of 25-26. Okay, so they would be under the rules then at that stage. They would have to have full storage for whatever the stock they had in the previous winter. So
yeah,
they would have to have 18-week storage for any bovines that they would have, or 6 weeks for any sheep. They can't say that they're really outwintering. Okay, they really need to talk a bit about that with their advisor, just to you know, that's a kind of a quick answer on it. In terms of the slurry storage is the standard slurry storage that's there. That's not changing going forward. It's not changing for suckler cows or beef animals. It's only changing for dairy cows. So the figure at the minute is 0.29 of a cubic meter per cow per week for suckler cows. That's not changing into the future. So yeah.
Yeah, okay, Seamus. And look, it's another reason that if you're doing a big job like a slatted shade or something like that, that you plan well in advance to cover off and all that. Just a quicker one here, Seamus. I think you might have covered this in your presentation. Is there a minimum capital investment that must be spent in order to qualify for TAMS 3?
Yeah, 2,000 euros on an application. Yeah.
Okay. And is there any funding available for machinery bought for hedge maintenance under the Animal Welfare and Nutrient Storage Scheme?
You can get a mulcher to mount on the arm of a digger. Okay, or a hedge cutter. So that's the flail type mulcher that can be mounted. You can get a 40% grant on that under the animal welfare, or a young farmer will qualify for 60% on it. And that can be put on the arm of a hedge cutter or a digger. That's the only thing that's available.
Okay, and just one last quick one there. Is there an electrical cert needed if I apply to fit a replacement roller door to my slatted shed?
No, because the roller door doesn't necessarily have to have electric motor on it.
Okay, look, we're gone over time there, so we'll finish up on that. And again, and thanks to the two lads for their presentations. And just Brendan, before we finish up tonight, just to mention there very quickly that the Teagasc National Beef Conference takes place next Tuesday, the 18th in November, in the Rahing Woods Hotel there in Athenry, starting at 5 p.m. Look, it's an action-packed evening with excellent speakers, with a particular emphasis this year on producing high-value weanlings. And it's a free event and all are welcome. And we'd love to see a big turnout when the beef conference is on here in the West this year. And with that, I'll hand back to you, Brendan, there to wrap up.
Thanks very much, Alan. Indeed, look, we're just about out of time this evening. Indeed, I think we've gone over a little bit on time, but I'd like to sincerely thank our two panelists there this evening, Seamus and Chris, tonight for their help with the webinar. Indeed, to Alan there for handling the questions and answers here tonight. And indeed, most importantly, thanks to you at home this evening for staying with us, engaging our panelists, and indeed putting the questions into the Q&A. We hope you found this webinar beneficial. We'd like to get the recording uploaded into the Teagasc Mayo YouTube channel in the coming days, so keep an eye out for that. All that's left for me to say is that we'll be here again next week for the second episode in the series, where Ronan Mulligan from Teagasc and Claremorris will discuss a number of topical dairy-related issues, while Damien Barrett from the Department of Agriculture will be with us to give us an update on TB control within herds. So that promised to be a very worthwhile and important webinar episode there that all farmers across the region should tune into. So that's all happening next week at the same time, next Tuesday evening. So with that, it's good night from us all here in Teagasc and Mayo, and stay safe, folks, and see you all again next Tuesday evening. Good night, folks.